I couldn't abandon my mother. I was consumed by worry for my father. Please, can you drive? Take us to the hospital, I implored Bob, desperation lacing my voice. For a moment, Bob just stared at me, but then he nodded. All right, he said, and immediately began preparing himself. Thank you, I murmured, my relief palpable. Swiftly, I readied myself, and together, we set out towards the hospital in Bob's car. As we ventured deeper into the woods, something seemed awry with the car. I'm sorry, but can you get out and check the front tire? Bob requested. Obliging, I stepped out, shutting the passenger door behind me. But to my bewilderment, as I inspected the tire, Bob started the car without letting me back in. He pulled the vehicle over to the opposite lane, hurriedly approached me, and tossed my bag at me through the open window. That's for waking me up in the middle of the night, he sneered before speeding away, disappearing from sight in no time. 2 hours later, I arrived at the hospital, my heart pounding with fear. There, I found Bob critically injured. My name is Catherine Thompson, 24 years old, a housewife. After college, I had joined a major corporation, but I resigned after marrying a senior colleague, Bob. Bob was not only handsome and intelligent, but also an all-around athlete, every girl's dream man. My initial feelings for him were akin to a fan's adoration for a celebrity, thrilled by his presence in the office and any interaction with him. Unexpectedly, Bob approached me one day after I was assigned to the administrative department. Our relationship escalated from work-related conversations to dating, and soon after, we were married. I had always wondered why he had chosen me. When I asked him, he simply said, "Because you loved me the most," making my heart swell with joy. However, after our marriage, a discomfort settled in. Bob became increasingly critical, chastising me for trivial matters like overcooking eggs or not responding to messages promptly. He'd quiz me on complex subjects, always pointing out my flaws with a calm yet condescending demeanor. I found myself walking on eggshells, trying desperately to meet his ever-changing standards, hoping to avoid his disapproval. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my ordeal. All I could think about was avoiding Bob's scolding. It had become my sole preoccupation. However, as exhaustion wore me down, Bob would interject, his tone laced with dissatisfaction. You know, Catherine, appearances do matter. Lately, you look perpetually tired. What would people think? You should always present yourself at your best as my wife, he'd admonish. He insisted on buying me expensive clothes, makeup, and spa treatments. Ironically, the one thing I didn't need to worry about was money, thanks to Bob's wealth. I strained my nerves to meet his demands, trying to enhance my appearance. Consequently, people around me would shower me with compliments like, "Catherine, you have such a wonderful husband. I'm so envious. I wish I could have married someone like Bob. How I wish I could trade places with you." From their perspective, I understood their envy, but the reality was a living nightmare. Desperately following Bob's orders, 2 years passed. Underneath my smiling facade, I was slowly losing myself. Then, one late night, my smartphone rang, snapping me from my momentary escape into a dream world back to harsh reality. Glancing at Bob, who was sleeping next to me, I answered the call. It was my mom, her voice filled with distress. "Catherine, your father." She choked out between sobs. "Dad had had a heart attack and was undergoing surgery." "What? Dad?" I exclaimed, my heart racing. "Okay, I got it. I'm on my way." I hung up and turned to Bob, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on at this hour?" I asked. The clock showed it was well past 1 a.m. "Sorry, but—" I explained the situation, desperation coloring my words. "I need to go to the hospital. Can you drive me there?" Bob stared at me in silence for what felt like an eternity. It was a critical moment for my father. Surely, even Bob would agree to drive. Although I had a driver's license, I wasn't allowed to drive Bob's car. "I can't leave my mom alone. I'm worried about Dad. Can you please drive? Take me to the hospital." After what seemed like an endless pause, Bob finally relented. All right, he muttered and began to get dressed. Thank you, I said, gratitude washing over me. I quickly prepared myself, and soon we were on our way to the hospital in Bob's car. The hospital was only about 7 to 8 miles away, a mere 10 to 15 minutes drive by car. The main road offered a direct route to the hospital, but Bob chose to take a detour onto a side road, claiming it was faster because it was the middle of the night. I'm grateful you're trying to get me there quickly, I said, appreciating his concern. Despite his harshness, I believed deep down that he cared for me. After driving down the side road for a while, we entered a wooded area. I remembered Bob mentioning that this route was more scenic during our drives. Suddenly, Bob stopped the car, and I got out as he requested, closing the passenger door behind me. But then, to my shock, Bob started the car without me inside. It moved a short distance forward, then reversed, turned around, and came back to where I stood, utterly bewildered. I had a crucial presentation scheduled for the next day, and here I was, abruptly awakened at this ungodly hour. Bob had parked on the opposite lane, and he hurried toward me, hurling my bag through the open window. This is your punishment for waking me up in the middle of the night, he sneered in a chilling tone before driving off in the same direction. In the dim light of the forest, it was almost surreal how swiftly he vanished from sight. The location was within a not-so-deep forest, and the clock was inching towards 2 a.m. Most people might have felt helpless or even broken down in such a situation, but oddly, I felt a strange sense of relief. I kept walking straight toward the hospital, a distance of about 6 miles. All I could think about was reaching my parents as quickly as possible. Bob's angry face was the last thing on my mind. When he'd thrown that bag at me, I had nearly broken down in tears, wondering what I had done to deserve such treatment. But in my confusion, Bob's words echoed in my mind. It's punishment for waking me up in the middle of the night. If it were some trivial reason, it would be my fault. But what if my father-in-law was in critical condition, undergoing emergency surgery, and my mother-in-law was anxiously waiting? Bob seemed utterly indifferent to my need to be with them. His actions were far from normal. I had once imagined Bob as a prince from a fairy tale, living a dream by marrying him. But that dream had transformed into a nightmare. The real-life prince turned out to be selfish, admitting he married me because I was his biggest admirer, an easy person to manipulate. I had believed I was loved and chosen by him, striving to be a good wife. But now I no longer cared. In that forest, I found my freedom. I couldn't go back to that cage, nor did I have any intention to. As I walked hastily through the forest, my mind was filled with thoughts of liberation from the superficiality of Bob's existence. After about 2 hours of walking, I finally reached the hospital. I informed the staff at the emergency entrance about my father, who had been brought in by an ambulance and was undergoing surgery. After verifying my details, they handed me a visitor's badge, which I wore around my neck. In the dimly lit corridor, the sound of my heels clicking on the floor was the only noise. 2 hours had passed since my arrival, and my anxiety grew. I wondered how my dad was faring and how my mom was holding up. My pace quickened naturally. After turning a few corners, I saw my mom sitting under a dim light on the sofa. "Mom," I called out, and she looked up, tears streaming down her face. An unsettling feeling settled in my chest. "Is something wrong with Dad?" I asked, sitting down next to her. No, she reassured me. "I just felt relieved seeing your face. Your dad is still in surgery." You startled me. A surge of blood rushed from my heart, draining me of all strength. After what felt like an eternity, the lights in the operating room finally dimmed. The surgeon emerged, delivering the news we desperately awaited. The operation had been successful. Although it would take time for my father's condition to stabilize, the immediate danger had passed. My mother and I cried tears of relief together. In the solemn corridors of the hospital, we followed as my father was transferred to the ICU on a stretcher, his face peaceful in slumber. There was nothing more we could do but wait for him to wake up and recover. It was essential to ensure my mother got some rest. I couldn't help but feel anger at Bob, thinking about the lonely hours my mother had endured before my arrival. I led my mother to the vending machine area, buying her a warm tea. "Here, drink this to calm down," I said, handing her the cup. "Thank you," she said, sipping her coffee. Her calmness brought me a sense of relief too. We sat in the coffee area, the soft glow of dawn illuminating our surroundings. Suddenly, a nurse approached us. "Excuse me, are you Catherine Thompson, Bob Thompson's wife?" she inquired. I nodded in confirmation. She explained that my husband had been brought in around 2 a.m. the previous night, and they had been trying to contact me without success. I hastily checked my phone, realizing I had muted it, thinking I'd be at the hospital shortly. There were several missed calls from an unknown number, which turned out to be the hospital's. Bob had provided both our home and mobile numbers, expecting me to follow him home. He likely never anticipated that I would walk over 6 miles alone to the hospital through the woods. I explained my father's situation and apologized for missing the calls. The nurse then updated me about Bob. After leaving me behind, he had an accident on his way home. Both his legs were broken, and he needed surgery. I asked my mother to wait and went to see him. The nurse led me to the room where Bob lay, his legs immobilized, looking pitiful. He tried to speak, realizing I wasn't alone. "I'm sorry for putting you through this, especially with your father in such a state. I'm glad you came," he said, offering an apologetic smile. As the nurse left, Bob's tone changed. "Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you answer the phone right away?" he demanded, accusatory. "Where you think? You told me my father had surgery." "Obviously, I was at the hospital," I replied, my voice laced with defiance. Bob seemed genuinely shocked by my response. "What's with that tone? Haven't I always told you to speak politely and gracefully? I won't tolerate such language," he chastised, attempting to regain control. "Why should I be polite to someone who deceived me and left me in a forest in the middle of the night? I don't feel the need to show such consideration," I said, my voice firm. "I don't have a master anymore. I reclaimed myself in that forest," I declared confidently, asserting my newfound freedom. I stood my ground, proclaiming my freedom, and Bob's face twisted with invisible anger. "Is that what someone who's been taken care of should say?" he retorted defiantly. "Well, is that what someone who's been cared for should say?" I shot back, my words laced with a newfound confidence. Bob jerked in shock, causing pain in his immobilized legs, and he let out a cry of pain. I looked down at him coldly, his face contorted in agony and drenched in sweat. "Guess you got what was coming to you," I said, a chuckle escaping me naturally after my words. I laughed, and Bob cried, roles reversed. "What's so funny? It's all your fault I'm in this mess. Don't you feel guilty?" Bob's voice was tearful yet defiant. "My fault? No, I think it's someone who left his wife in a forest and hurried home." "Serves you right," I countered, my tone unyielding. Bob looked at me in disbelief, shock and fear reflecting in his eyes. His once obedient wife, who had admired him, was now confronting him with icy words and glances, as if he were a stranger. He seemed disturbed, his eyes darting around the room. I realized he was just a small, insignificant man. I felt a sense of shame for having feared and submitted to him for so long. "We should break up," I spoke firmly. "I don't see any point in being married to you anymore. I'll wait until you're discharged from the hospital, so please prepare yourself. In the meantime, I'll pack up our stuff at home. Don't be ridiculous. I'm never going to leave you. Do you realize how much time and effort I've put into this relationship?" Bob protested, his voice breaking as he moved. "Do you have anything else to say? If you do, now's the time. What will it be?" I challenged him, but Bob continued to cry, unable to respond. "Nothing then? All right, I have to go care for my father. Take care and goodbye," I said, leaving the room, Bob groaning in pain. Later that day, my father woke up, and we held hands, tears of joy streaming down our faces. Although he still had a way to go in his recovery, it was a relief to know he was stable. I returned to my family home with my mom and shared my decision to divorce Bob. Initially shocked, my mother nodded in silence after hearing my side of the story and welcomed me back home. She had never imagined her daughter, whom she believed was living happily, was being treated so poorly. I cried at her understanding and for making them worry, weeping until I began preparations for the next step. First, I started looking for a lawyer experienced in divorce cases, which proved surprisingly easy due to a friend's connection in a law firm. I met with a few lawyers and decided on a female attorney who had helped many women like me suffering from emotional abuse. I gained an experienced and powerful ally. Just when Bob was in the hospital, I organized my belongings and prepared to leave the house. The challenge was to prove Bob's fault, which surprisingly turned out to be easy. When Bob had an accident and was questioned by the police, he told them I had an accident on my way back from dropping off my wife at the hospital where she wanted to be with her father, who was undergoing an emergency operation. However, his story seemed off. After all, I arrived at the hospital 2 hours after Bob's accident. When asked where he was and what he was doing during that time, I honestly told them everything, including being abandoned in the forest late at night. At first, the police were shocked, but as they listened, they began to suspect it was malicious abandonment. Many people, not just the police, but also those involved with insurance, his company, and others, eventually found out the truth. Every time Bob made mistakes, I was grateful. In this way, I was able to prove how much Bob had belittled, neglected, and hurt me during our 2-year marriage. He was deemed at fault due to emotional abuse, although it was a short marriage of only 2 years, and I never had to worry about finances. I was able to secure a satisfactory amount in alimony and divorced Bob. After the divorce, I returned to my family home and took care of my father for a while. Fortunately, my father's recovery was smoother than expected, and he seemed to be getting back to his regular life without any lingering effects. His workplace even told him he could return after a brief hiatus, and he was deeply grateful for that stroke of luck. Luckily, I got a job at the law firm that assisted me during my divorce. Thanks to a friend's recommendation and the lawyer who had seen my true nature during my interactions with Bob, the hiring process went smoothly. Thus, our family of 3 was slowly moving forward. Bob had completely lost his trustworthiness since our divorce. No matter how good-looking or elite he might be, he was now recognized as a terrible person who couldn't treat others properly. It seemed like no one wanted anything to do with him anymore. A former colleague reached out, wanting to talk. Apparently, after Bob recovered from his injuries and returned to work, he was spreading the story that I was a terrible woman who abandoned him when he was injured. Despite many people already knowing the real reason for our divorce, I was astounded at how much he underestimated me. So, I asked my lawyer to send him a formal notice threatening to sue for defamation if he didn't correct his story. My friends also shared the real story, and those who were about to believe Bob's version now recognized him as a lying emotional abuser. Well, he still seemed to have his job because he was competent, but I wondered how long he could keep it up in such a hostile environment. Right now, I wasn't ready to look for someone new, but I wanted to find someone who truly cared for me next time. I wanted to show my parents a genuinely happy version of myself. For that day, I would keep my head held high and continue moving forward.